There you go. I'm John Kane, and this is Resistance Radio. I want to thank you for joining me. Again, it's always great to be able to broadcast in New York City and in Washington D.C. And as you guys kind of know, I'm a little cynical oftentimes about the special holidays and even our so-called special month. But it is National Native American Heritage Month, so I would be remiss if I didn't do a little bit of a cultural piece. So I've got my good friend Delaronde joining me for the program today. And look, there's a lot of confusion about what it is to be Haudenosaunee or Haudenosaunee. And part of it has been the idea of always casting us as relics of the past, always trying to explain us as this is what we were. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we counsel and how we're supposed to counsel, or rather, Dagarundage is going to. That's what I want to put to him is a clear explanation. Because look, I've heard lots of explanations. We've been a part of many discussions, even on this program. But Dega is one of the guys that I rely on, not only from a linguist standpoint, from his knowledge of the language, but just his background in the culture and having been so much a part of everything that we essentially stand for today. So I want to start by talking about how we counsel, which is how our governing structure was to work. Because there's a lot of misunderstanding. Everybody thinks about chiefs, or they think about clan mothers. They think about, we mistakenly refer to our system as being matriarchal as opposed to having a matrilineal side to how we designate clans and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of confusion. But there's also a lot of confusion about how we operate, how we govern within essentially within a traditional system within a longhouse. So I want to talk about that, and then I want to kind of bring it back to who we are now, where we are now, and what we do going forward. So let me introduce my good friend Degarundage, who also goes by his uh, slave name, I guess, Paul Delaronde. So if you don't know Degarundage, you may know the name Paul Delaronde. You may have seen his picture posted in the post office or something like that. Um, but anyway, let me introduce my good friend Degarundage. Dega, thanks for coming in and sitting with me today.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Well, I kind of prepped you a little bit. One of the things I want to talk about, and look, I made the trip up to Akwesasne last week. My good friend Matt, who is sitting in listening today, we made the trip up, and we always have a spirited conversation on the way up, and of course on the way back. And one of the things I wanted to explain, or have you explain, is how we govern, how a decision is reached, how issues are addressed. And sometimes there's confusion from one nation to another within the Haudenosaunee on who sits on what side of the longhouse and that kind of stuff. And of course, different nations have different clan makeups and that kind of stuff. But from a Mohawk standpoint, or a Gunjageha standpoint, we talk about there being the bear, the wolf, and the turtles, and there's three families within each one of those animal designations or clan designations. So let's start with the basics. When you look at a Mohawk longhouse, and of course Akwesasne comes to mind because that's where I frequent probably more than any other place. The longhouse essentially sits with the doors running on the east side and the west side,
Yeah.
and on the east side is where um, essentially the three one clan sits with against that east wall. And what clan sits there?
That would be the turtles, or what we call Rodinyaktu.
And to the north side,
Is the Ronatahuni, what people call the wolf.
and then on the south side.
Is Rodiskarewage, the bears.
Okay, now we many people are somewhat familiar with the idea of the three sides of a longhouse, and how an issue is discussed generally, but not specifically. So we have one of the clans is designated essentially as what we call the well.
Yeah.
Explain which clan serves as the well and what that entails.
Well, you see, we use the three as totems of our families. and we have three wolf clan, and they they are called Ronatahuni, which means they make the path. Um, and the reason they have that responsibility is that um, of the three, the wolf is the one that he never hibernates. He's always awake, and in order for him to survive and so on, and especially in the cold winters and so on, he has to be very quick with his thinking, and also it depends on his speed and that. And so this is why he's that side of the house is chosen for that. And them being called Renata Uni, it's self-explanatory. And and so issues are brought to them and that. And so um, they begin the council and that, not with decision, but they just set the agenda and they pass the issue to the south side of the house where Rudishkarewage sit. And they're called Rudishkarewage. And what it means is that they're always looking for the cones of the bees, and because that's one of their favorite foods, and also it provides a lot of protein and nutrition, and that. And so the berries always looking for those things. So
Now you explained that it isn't necessarily just the honeybee; it's the bee's nest
it's the
because they
bees,
want the
yeah,
larva is
yeah.
what they're after.
They're after that larva. They're not really after. They'll eat the honey but they're really after the larva.
It's not just Pooh Bear then.
No, no. We need a pool. Well, that's a different kind of a bear. Anyway, it's given to them because um, they're to analyze the issue first, and it's the nature of the bear when he's looking for the honeycomb. He has to um, really search for it. He'll climb the trees. He'll turn over logs. He'll turn over stones. He'll dig in the ground. He goes all over looking for these the beehives. And so it is said, well, if the bee is of that nature that he knows what the environment is, and he's always searching, so he knows where just about everything is, and he really dissects the matter in order to be able to find that what he's looking for.
So they use the characteristics of these animals
Yeah,
to represent the responsibilities of
that's
the
right.
clans that are represented by them.
Yeah, that's right. And so this is why, like a lot of people today, not knowing our language and that, all they know is they sit on these different sides of the house. And a lot of people say, well, I'm a wolf. But they're not wolves. The wolf is an animal. The bear is an animal. The turtle is an animal. That's why we have specific names. Runatahyuni for what is called the wolf. But it means that he's the path maker. And then the bear, he's Rudishkarewage, because he's always looking for those. Oskarewa is the cones, and that he's always looking for those. And then the turtle, he's called Ronyatu, and that because the thing is that he makes his neck disappear into his shell, and later I'll get into why. And so when the issues come to the well, it's given. Each issue is first given to the bears, and then they analyze, they dissect the matter and everything, and then when they're done, they come to a conclusion. They throw their findings back to the wolves, and the wolves take everything in consideration. The things they explain how they reach their conclusion. So it comes back to the wolves. The wolves take into consideration everything the bears had to say. But if the wolf feels that something isn't really complete, they'll give the issue back to the bear and tell them why uh, they couldn't accept that the bears need to look at this more carefully. So the bears will do that. So after they've done it again, then they pass it back to the wolves and explain, and they have somewhat of a different conclusion. And so if it's acceptable to the wolf, then he passes it to the turtles. And then on the turtle side, all the while they've been listening, they've been watching, they've been witnessing this deliberation between these two sides of the house, and that, and they take all that into consideration. And if they feel there need to be adjustments or whatever else, then they'll explain why, and they'll give it back to the wolves. Then the wolves will give it back to the bears again and start the process all over. And it's very thorough. And well, finally, if the turtle finally accepts what the two sides of the house have to say, and and then it's acceptable to all of them. Now they became of like minds. And then one of the turtles, um, his title is the Garihoga. And this the Garihoga, what he will do is that he will get up and he'll explain how the issue came. He'll explain to how the deliberation went on and how they reached their conclusions and so on. And then he'll address the people. He say, "Togo ni wa ni go rodo." And is that your minds? Is it acceptable to you? And and if there's no objection, then the people give it back to the council. Then the council can ratify a decision because now they're all of like minds. But if when he does that and somebody feels that it's not complete, then that person will express why they think it's not right, and and they bring they bring their concern up, and then the council, they'll take that and they'll go through it again, and they'll try to what's the word, try to make it right, and and then after all that's done, again the Garihogo will ask the people, now is that acceptable to you? Is that to your agreement? And there's no objection. Then the council can now pass it back and forth to ratify the decision. But one thing people like today will say, once a decision is made, you can't change it. That's not true. And that if at some time in the future something comes up that they, in all that deliberation, they may not have considered, they have a right to pull that decision back.
I guess the point there is that it would have to be pulled back. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not like you just say, "Well, we're going to disregard that decision," because
yeah,
that decision was made,
yeah.
and it was made by all the people.
That's
So
right.
you can't just say, "Well, we're not going to consider that anymore because we've learned something new."
Yeah,
It should actually go through the same
it has to
process.
go back to the same process. You always do things to make it right. You can just let things fly, because the thing is, every decision we make, and that when we make that and we deliberate and so on and so forth, we always have our children and our future children in mind, and that because we don't want them to inherit a problem. We want to make it as right as possible so that they don't have to be burdened with our negligence.
Let me back up just a little bit because there is an issue that arises where you would have two sides of the longhouse that would be in agreement and a third side who doesn't necessarily agree. And
Yeah,
so this is the whole idea of having three sides of the longhouse,
yeah,
so you don't remain deadlocked where you just have one opposing, one
mm,
agreeing. So that third side has the opportunity uh, to express their concerns just like an
yeah,
individual would, and either try to convince one or both that there's something that has not been considered properly, and they may find themselves that even after having expressed their concerns, that the two other sides remain in agreement, and it is that third side that will concede, knowing full well that if two sides
mm,
agree, then a third side
mm,
can't be the
mm.
disruptive factor.
See what happens in that case if they're not of like mind. All right, and they try to resolve it. But if it's too heavy of an issue, then what they'll do is they say, we're gonna sleep on it. We're gonna put it under our pillow, and then the next time they come back together, they'll address that same issue again. And if again they can't come to like minds, then everyone takes it back again and considers everything that's taken place in that. But the third time it comes to council, and if it's still that way, there's two sides. The house agrees and one side doesn't. Then the two sides and that will what's
Override or whatever
override,
else
and so that third side and that has to go along with it.
they concede,
They
essentially.
concede, and yeah, so it's a very well thought out process.
But it's not necessarily like you said. I think one of the things that people have the sense is that when something goes to a council, whether it's a nation council or a grand council, that those people sitting in that council have the full authority to make a decision.
Yeah,
But a lot of when wampums are sent out, and most of the people have already within their clans, within their families, have had some sense that there is a deliberation that's going to take place. So those guys who go to those men who are sitting there have already are carrying in large part the will of the people already. So they don't have the opportunity. That's why
yeah,
you say that that turtle representative has to stand up and make sure that the people are in agreement.
yeah.
And but if they can't come to agreement, then it isn't just that two sides override.
No,
It goes back to the communities.
yeah,
So when they say sleep on it, it's sleep on it. You're essentially saying you're going to take it back to your communities,
that's right.
fully express what the concerns were of the third side,
Yeah,
what the two sides agreed upon. Again, summarized in the same way that it's done in council, and it might take two or three times to make to come to a decision.
that's right. You never rush. You never rush because the decision you make, your children and grandchildren are going to inherit that, and you want to do your utmost best that you're never going to burden them with a problem because you were negligent or you were too much in a rush or anything like
Or
that.
too emotional on the
Yeah,
subject or
and
whatever else. Yeah.
it's a slow process, but it's not really that slow. And that, but the thing is that whenever an issue is dropped into the well, and that from the well, all the 9 families of the Mohawks are not notified. They're given these issues and so on. And then the families, what they people call the clans, those families will all analyze this and that. And when they're doing that, that Royaner and that Yagoyaner who represents the family has to be present. They have to listen to what the people are saying, so that when their representatives go back to the council, and that they know what the minds of their people are, because you don't have power over the people. You're just the person who represents your family, and you're raising the opinion of your family. And so when these Rodianes are sitting, they're sitting in threes. So they get to discuss these things and they get to come to an understanding of and that because in most situations, most families pretty much come to the same conclusions. And that so by doing it this way, it makes it easier for the Rodianesu. And that so when they start to deliberate over this, they're pretty much trying to stay in lines with the wish and the will of the people in accordance with our constitution.
And again, not every issue rises to the need of having something go before a nation council
No.
or to a grand council. Many issues are resolved within the families, just like
Yeah,
we would expect. So anybody who looks at this and thinks that it's so burdensome, it really isn't. It's really designed to um, to really resolve any potential conflict and to address the most serious or pressing matters or an issue that
mm,
perhaps catches everybody a little bit by surprise and it's something
mm.
they've got to consider, something they haven't considered
You see,
before.
the thing is, a lot of times, if there's a problem, it's not the clan that sits in on this right away. That's what Royaner, Yagoyaner is for. They will deal with the individuals to try to resolve.
Gather as much
Yeah,
information.
and try to resolve it on the smallest scale, and that. But if it needs, only then does the family get brought in. But the thing is, a lot of times those are not like the like what you call the nation issue. It's a clan issue, and they can resolve that, and that issue never goes to the council.
Well, and it's interesting because we use that word council, but essentially when we're talking about the both, whether it's the women or the men who are the head of these family, or not really the head, but the representatives of these families,
Representatives.
they also have they're not just counselors in terms of being able to sit in a council, but they also have they're put in those positions for their ability to counsel people.
Yeah,
to hear a problem, to offer good counsel, to offer advice. So it isn't just counsel with a C; it's counsel with an S for those who are wondering what I'm talking about. So it's this idea that there look, sometimes these issues may be personal. They may be
yeah,
really, something, deep within a family that doesn't warrant being, put out in front of the entire nation. Or and I also wanted to mention that we're explaining this within within the context of doing this in a Mohawk longhouse. But all of the longhouses of the Haudenosaunee are that operate in a similar manner with
yeah,
three sides of the longhouse.
yeah.
And in fact, the Grand Council operates in the same way
That's right.
with with again with the Onondaga sitting on the end of the longhouse
On the
with
east side of
on
the
the east side
longhouse,
with the turtle and the
no, Cayuga and Oneida on the
I'm sorry,
south
yeah, I'm
side,
sorry, yeah,
and then
yeah.
Mohawks and the Senecas would sit on the north side, and it's pretty much the same process, and that, but instead of the Garihogo, it would be Adodaho, because Adodaho is the one who convenes this gathering. He has that responsibility. That big issues that are brought, he will look at them and decide if it warrants an issue to be talked about at a Grand Council level. And sometimes, if he's having a problem, trying to figure, he can consult with the Onondagas.
Who are
Be-
on that side of that longhouse with
no,
him
because it's Adodaho has to reside
in there.
in Onondaga, and the thing is, any Royaner who is chosen to be the Adodaho, if he's Oneida or Seneca or Cayuga or Ganyaga, he has to go live in Onondaga because that's the center of the house,
Right.
and it's the shortest distance for the runners to go. Instead of running all the way from the east, running to the western door, no, they go to the center of the house. So he's there. All the issues are brought to him, and then he analyzes all of it. And then if he ever has a problem, he can consult with the Onondagas. And but the thing is, he if he decides he doesn't even want to consider what they have to say, he'll just go move forward on by himself to decide if it warrants this issue warrants the attention of a Grand Council. And he does the same thing as the Garihogo. When the council, and when he goes back and forth the same way, from north to south, and then after that he goes to the east, and that it's same as with in all the other longhouses, and then he's the one who will get up, and then he'll give it back to all the people again and ask them if they're in agreement, and if they're all in agreement, and that because what he'll do is he'll go through the whole thing, explain
Summarize it all. Yep.
a big summary on that, so everybody totally understands what really has been taking place, and that's his responsibility. See, one thing about Arodaho, a lot of people don't know, and they don't understand that Arodaho is about a responsibility. And the thing is, whoever is chosen to be a Adodaho, he is chosen by the 49 Rodianesu of the Confederacy. And that they will choose him. That's not a position that is chosen by the people. It's the representatives who will choose him because they will choose the one they know they can work with, that he's fair, and so on and so forth. And they're the ones that will choose him. And he could even be a sitting Royana to be chosen to fill that position. And then that Royana who vacates that position, his family will put a new one in, you know. And but
Because essentially that position is no longer singularly associated with a clan, is what
no,
you're
no,
saying.
no. And the thing that's why I say he can come out of any of the 49 families, and this Adodaho. But
But he's not necessarily a part of the Onondaga Council
no,
either, and
he's not.
that's a lot of confusion that we see
No,
today. That I've heard some people describe him as the head chief of the Onondaga Council,
no.
and he's actually a title holder. That title is essentially belongs to the entire Confederacy. It's not
Yes.
a
Mhm.
singularly Onondaga, or and certainly
No,
not a
and he's
singularly to a
only
clan
there in Onondaga because it's the
location.
center of the longhouse, we say. Okay, and and again, all the runners with the issues go to him, and then when he comes to the decision of the importance of these issues, and then he will send runners, and that we call them rutuapa. These runners will go to each of the territories to inform them about when the gathering is going to
What
be,
the issue is.
and what the issues are and so on, because they have to know in advance. Because you got to remember, back in the old day, we didn't have cars and all this kind of stuff. People used to walk or go by canoe to go to a meeting. So sometimes it would take them weeks to get to a gathering, and when they had the gathering, and that sometimes that took weeks, their assembly took weeks. They didn't weren't there just on the weekend. They were there for a long time, and the thing is that it has to be organized and planned and everything else, because there are gonna be so many people coming.
It's a big
They gotta
event. It's
they
a big
gotta
event.
feed
Yeah.
the people and everything else, and but they also have singing and
Socials and yeah.
dancing and all this. They have a good time and that. So there's a lot that goes into it. Nowadays, they call a grand council, and and they run out. Everybody runs out there on a weekend, and the thing is, there's not a lot of people that go, because a lot of people don't see it the same way.
Well,
They
and I want to talk about that, but because I do want to talk about kind of where we're at now. But the one thing I do want to emphasize is that this existed for thousands.
thousands of,
Everybody, people try to put a date to it. Oh, wasn't
yeah,
that about the 1500s when this started? Look, and they try to associate it with a total solar eclipse and all this other
yeah.
stuff, and they try to mystify it a lot more. But this was what was the organization that came out of the Gondowida, Hayuenta, and essentially
Mm,
reestablishing
mhm.
the relationships between those 49 families.
But you see, one thing I want people to understand, you know, they talk about this Adodaho as though he was a person, a man. And that's the same thing with Ayunwata. They say, oh, Ayunwata because of a story. And see, the thing is, in our language, we call that Ogara. It's a story that was put together to pass on to the children, to teach the children. It's like many cultures around the world, they have what they call mythology. It's not something that this is exactly what happened, but the principles and the philosophy of what our ways are is what is created through this story. And it's like Ododaho. There's a big long story about Ododaho and all this kind of stuff, about him, being an evil person, all this kind of stuff. But when you really know this stuff, you know that Adodaho is about a responsibility, and that Adodaho, that that position, he doesn't have a clan mother. All the other Rodianeso has a clan mother, except Adodaho, and that because his family is all the 49 families. The same way in our Mohawk Longhouse, we have a man whose position called the Ayunwes, and we call him the keeper of the house, and he's the one that makes sure that all procedure and protocol is done properly, and Adodaho is the same. He's there to make sure all procedure and protocol is followed. It's a responsibility. It means what Adodaho means we're all connected. We're all connected to this one responsibility. That's why you Adodaho means we're connected. We're hooked on.
Well, and as you did explain, there is not just a responsibility, but he does have some decision making powers about when to hold a council,
Yeah,
whether to
no,
hold a
he
council,
does that.
so it is a bit of a singular responsibility
Yeah,
that none of the others have that same level of responsibility.
that's right.
But the decisions and the deliberation is not it's not up to him. He's just
No,
making sure
he's
the
he's
process is
no,
followed.
he's not even part of the deliberation. He sits and watches to make sure everything is done properly, and also to reinforce it. there's an Onondaga who the title is Onowiretu. Onowiretu sits on one side of Adudaho. And on the other side of Adudaho is Satdegariwate. And so these two Rodiane, they're there to support him. And when people read these books and stuff, it says Adudaho, as at one side, he has a stick to cast out crawling creatures. And on the other side, he's got a seagull wing. And that's to keep the dust, around the council fire always clear and visible. But what that stick means is that onowireto, the title onowireto, what it says is that ohanowirete. If there's something that's there to disrupt the council, he'll take that and he'll remove it.
He's the stick.
He's the stick. Yeah, he's the stick and ohanowirete. It's like if you have something on the water, you sink it. By sinking it, nobody sees it. So it's out of sight and out of mind. And then if all of a sudden the council is not following procedure and protocol the way they're supposed to, and that Adudaho can correct them, but if he forgets, this is what the Gariwa they will do is he represents the seagull wing, and he will clean the dust around the fire, and he'll explain the Constitution again. He'll point out what wampum and so on and so forth. So he's always removing the dust from these things, so they always fresh in their minds. He reminds them, and then they get back on track and so on. I mean, our ancestors were really smart to think of all these things.
Well, and the metaphors. I mean, the
Yeah.
use of other parts of what the
Yeah,
literal
yeah.
translations of these things.
See,
It goes to understanding what their mindset
see,
was.
but that's what I want to get back to is to Anyuwata. Anyuwata is a character in a story, but it's not a man. Anyuwata is about the responsibility of that family. They're known as the wampum keepers, and that family makes sure that they teach the kids. Words are put into the wampum, and those children are taught everything, the words that were put into it. So when it comes time for the recitals, because every year we have to recite all the wampum to keep it fresh in the mind of the people, and so this family is the one who does like what I guess people call it a recital, and us we say a hadiata nodo, which is totally different than a recital. Hadiata nodo is they will expose the whole body of this wampum, oyata, what it's made of, and what was put into it, and everything else. So basically, they take it all back out and make the outside and the inside of that wampum understandable.
Well, look, this has been great to go through this level of detail, and there. I think there's people who have had a lot of misconceptions about how our councils work and how they're supposed to work. We also know that frankly, the Americans were influenced. The colonists, I should say, were influenced by that the deliberation and the process. They obviously were allowed to witness some of how we worked, and they were envious of it, and they
Well,
expressed that envy because they
mhm,
saw themselves as a people who should certainly be able to accomplish what
mm,
five or six you know
so-called uncivilized
uncivilized
tribes.
savages could. That's what the words of I think Ben Franklin said.
Yeah,
Ignorant savages could
yeah.
create a union that seemed indissoluble. Certainly, 13 colonies
Mm.
of Englishmen could do better.
See, the thing is, that most people don't know that the 13 colonists, they sat under our tree for 150 years. They were listening to recitals and translations of everything we were doing. That's why they loved this. And so they decided, because they seen that we have we have a republic. So that's why the United States tried to pattern themselves after us, and they refer to themselves as a republic, a government for the people,
They rejected
by
the notion of democracy.
by
In
the
fact, the
people.
founding fathers, because they didn't
Mhm.
like this idea
Yeah.
of it being mob rule.
Well, democracy came after because the United States decided, oh no, no, even though the Constitution says they're a republic, they don't follow that. they create this new thing called democracy. And the thing is, democracy isn't that great because all it is mob rule. And that, like back when the colonists decided they want to convince the people, the colonists themselves, like guys like Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, John Adams, all these guys, they were businessmen and they didn't want to pay taxes to King George. So they decided that this is the route they would go. So they would declare an independence from the crown so they don't have to pay those taxes. And and so to get the people to back them up and all this stuff, they had a man by the name of Thomas Paine. He was a writer and he would spread the propaganda. And so what he would say, basically, they're only hearing one side. And
Mhm.
so the people are latching onto this. So they support these guys. He's saying that, the king wants to take away their newfound liberty and this and that and everything. And so this is why they went to war. And the thing is, the king wasn't after the common people. He was after the businessmen. That's why the tea parties and all that kind of stuff happened all on the East Coast, not just Boston, all along the East Coast. But it was colonists that did it. But they dressed as Mohawks. And they went on these ships dressed as Mohawks. And the thing is that King George's soldiers were at the ports.
Pretendians already.
They were at the port, but they couldn't do anything about it because they didn't have any jurisdiction or sovereignty over the Mohawk people. So the Mohawks were free to throw it, but the Mohawks weren't throwing anything
Yeah,
around
it
because
was
they
them.
weren't the one being taxed, you know.
Well, let me kind of get back where I wanted to go with this explanation. The question that always comes to mind, and like I said, Matt and I spoke about this on our way back from Akwesasne last week. It's like we're not using this anymore, and I've seen glimmers of it. I've
Yeah.
seen longhouses function properly and then go off the rails again. I've seen it in Onondaga. I've seen it in Oneida. I've seen it in Mohawk territories. We've seen it and I've seen it over and over again. So we get to a place, and now with the work that I do, which is oftentimes about trying to educate people about the injustices that Native people have experienced at the hands of the United States and Canada, and so I try to go through that so people understand why we need to resist. But I oftentimes get asked the question. They say, "Well, okay, if you got what you wanted, what would that be?" And I always come back to the same place. I said, that would be free and independent again, once again.
Yeah.
But you can't operate in a vacuum. So if you gain that independence, if we do push back on the U.S. and Canada and gain the acknowledgement of our sovereignty, or for lack of a better word, I mean, and our autonomy and our distinction, that distinction and autonomy has to come back to a place, in this place that we just spent a half hour talking about. So my question always comes back to, and it's what Matt and I discussed on our way back. How do we get it back? How do we convince you and I aren't getting any younger? I hate to say it, but that's just the truth. So we're not getting any younger. So we have to hope that the next generation, not just our kids, but now our grandkids and younger, are going to pick up pieces of this and put it to use in a way, because look, we're going to keep pushing back. We're going to keep pushing back to the US and Canada and the states and the provinces and all that stuff. But at some point, we have to be able to govern ourselves. And if we don't govern ourselves in what is truly ours, then we're not really gaining independence. We're just mirror imaging ourselves after what the US and Canada
Well,
are.
you have to look at, what we've gone through. One of the biggest problems is that this Constitution of ours was developed and designed through a language that is totally different than that came across the ocean, and that. But when you stop to look at how they eroded the knowledge of our people through religion, through residential schools, through economics, by denying us our right to our own economy and limiting us on our own land.
Violence, death, let's put
And
it all out there.
all that was done. And then one of the main things that was done was to take away our languages, and that forbidding our children to learn to speak our languages. Then things started happening. like the community I come from, and that most people stopped teaching the children the language, and the parents started trying to learn to speak English, and that's why we still speak broken English no matter what, and that. But the thing is that our children no longer had the language. There were several families in my community that resisted, and that's the only reason I speak the language, because when the Seaway came true back in the 50s, people stopped speaking to their children. My family, oh no, that was the law. We only could speak our language in our home. My grandmother would tell us, look, that door, when you pass it, you can speak any language you want, but while you're in this house, you're going to speak Ungwe. And that was it. And so that's why I never lost the language. And the thing is, it's hard, like for us, those of us who learned to speak the language, when we find a new partner in life, a husband or a wife, most of them don't speak our language. So it's very difficult for us to have our children become fluent speakers because one doesn't speak the language. So they have to converse in English. And so the children hear more English than our own language. And this is why, like now, people read these books and everything, and they oh, Ayunwata, he did this, and in a story, that character, that's what he did. Adodaho in the story as a character, this is what he did. But these are very important characters.
Well, and I think, I mean, what's even more critical is the idea of replacing um, native our original concepts with English words that don't like. I use the word sovereignty.
Yeah,
Sovereignty is not the proper word.
no,
And when we talk about anything, whether we talk about this process to deliberate, it is it. I'm not even sure the republic is the best word, but it's the closest word in
yeah.
English. But it's certainly not democracy. And you're going to hear people say, I've seen the poster. It's got a picture of the Hiawatha belt, and it says this is the first draft of the U.S. Constitution, and it
But
talks about
yeah,
democracy
but
and
people need to remember, but we didn't put that out.
no.
We
But
we did.
well, we see that those things hung up
Yeah,
in a lot of native
yeah,
places.
because most of them don't know anymore because they're ignorant of who we are, and for a while we start believing what Hollywood had to say,
Oh yeah.
and then we go to school and we're told our history and we're such terrible people, we're savages, and we burn poor priests and all this stuff, we rape women and children and all that, and none of that was true.
It was true, but it was them doing it.
Yeah, but we did burn the priest, but that's a whole other
That was
story, and people need to know why we burnt them, because that wasn't our way to execute somebody through burning them. The priest asked our people to burn them because they were found guilty of conspiracy and espionage, and the priest, because our culture, our way is that even our enemy we showed respect, and we asked them, "What is your preference of death?" And they wanted to become martyrs. And so in Europe, that was a practice. Like Joan of Arc and all these people get burnt and they become martyrs. And so these priests, Lalemount, Brebeuf, and the other six, all asked to be burnt at the stake. So we burnt them. We granted them a wish, their last wish. And if it was up to us, if the people had no choice, didn't have a preference, we just one blow to the head with a club, instant lights out. It's over. No suffering, no nothing. But they asked us to burn them. So today, even now, today we call them the Dijihanstati. And if you ask our people today, what does Rajihanstati mean? Oh, it means the priest. It doesn't mean that. Ojihansta, Ojihansta is when like meat is burnt and there's just a black, like
crispy,
charcoal kind
charred.
of
Yeah.
left, and that. So they became the first crispy critters here in North America because they asked to be burnt, and so we granted them their
Well,
wish.
and there's a lot of examples of language where I mean, we referred to George Washington after the Sullivan campaign as Randatakayas,
Yeah,
and I know that gets loosely translated, and I mean real loosely translated to town destroyer, but the thing is, and you are among the people who explained to me that no, it's much more vicious than that.
that's
It
right.
actually it's more descriptive towards the tearing away of flesh
Yeah,
and
it's like a rabid dog. no rhyme or reason, just attacks and just keeps biting and biting and biting, and he'll kill. And he didn't kill it to eat it. He's just going around just killing and killing and killing. That's why we called him Ranatagayas, because he sent Sullivan and others to come and to exterminate our people, and just so that we don't exist no more.
Well, and to essentially what he wanted to inflict was a level of terror, and that's the word that Washington used in his orders, a level of terror that would subdue a people for generations. So I mean, not only did they utilize terrorism as a military strategy, but the idea of intentionally inflicting intergenerational trauma was what they were after. And I think it's important to realize that. When you understand all of that and you understand the history, which is kind of where I spend a great deal of time explaining, I want people to understand that because this is all the stuff that has worked to destroy who we are. And I mean, a lot of the things when we talk about, how our systems got, essentially wiped out, part of it had to do with this whole notion of male dominant culture that came from Europe. And the idea that they were propping up even those Rodionists, because they were essentially
Yeah.
trying to lift them up like holy men or the leaders of people rather than the representatives of people.
See, we can talk about the history that happened with us, and it's still ongoing. It hasn't stopped, and but the thing is that our people tried very hard to educate the world to this way of peace and harmony, and but nobody listens, because if you look at present day, look around the world, the same thing is being repeated. And I mean, look at a few months, 40,000 Palestinian people have been murdered. I mean, but it's not just Palestine. It's going on. Look in the Ukraine. You look all over the world. People are experiencing the same thing over and over. And you think that the so-called civilized, intelligent people,
Christians, no less.
Christian, would have put an end to it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they, those institutions, were the most responsible for what goes on.
They perpetuate violence.
It's going on today.
Because it
Way
supports.
back in the old days, they were creating crusades to destroy another people, another culture, another belief, and that hasn't changed. We can look at Iran, we can look at Iraq, we can look at Libya and all that. That same genocide was committed, and it's still being committed around the world.
I'm gonna have a friend of mine from Hawaii join me in a couple of weeks, and
Yeah, there's a good
she was
example.
doing she was contemplating this whole notion that even to the extent that the current generations can look back at what they tried to rekindle from Hawaiian culture, she says, why are there no female gods or goddesses? It's always male patriarchy. And I said, well, that came with Cook, that came with
Well, they
that's
came close. Wonder Woman.
well, Dega, I want to thank you for joining me. That we pretty much wrapped up the time here.
Okay.
Look, regardless of it being our special month, I think it was a real treat to have you come in and explain this part of our culture and explain look, and I realize that this is a non-native audience listening primarily in New York City and in Washington D.C. But it was always our intent to share this with you. But also, I know that there's many native people who tune into the show. They listen to it as a podcast. They watch it on Facebook. So I'm hoping that we continue to plant this seed because, like I said, we're not getting any younger, and I think there does need to be uh, a renewal of some of these governing systems that we need to
Well,
reincorporate.
people keep saying, why do you keep going out there and trying to talk to people and they said they didn't respect that. Every agreement that was made with us, they broke it. They
Right.
violated it. And I tell people the reason we continue to explain that two row and other wampum to people that because they all made pledges that they will respect that.
Yeah.
And the thing is that we continue to repeat it over and over because we're hoping that there will be a generation that will finally stop and listen and fulfill their pledges.
Well,
so
we're
that
seeing
they
an
can
awful
be.
lot. We're seeing an awful lot unravel with the United States and Canada. So maybe more and more people will come to the realization that they've got to um, take the time to remember and understand some of this. So
There's no sense in saying the power of the people if the people are not going to exercise their power to straighten these matters out.
that's right. Again, I want to thank Delaronde for joining me. We'll be back next week. I'm John Kane, and this is Resistance Radio. Yahweh.
Yeah.